gravity drainage. So we're going to start with this profile. And I know we said something about texture, but we're going to back up a little bit and look at horizons. So how do we pick out horizons in any soil profile? Color, texture, any kind of difference that you can see or feel. Or taste. I tend not to taste most soils. So what I'm going to do here is sort of start at the top. Here's my 0. And if y'all come in as close as you can, as close as your personal space will allow, because we actually did have an O horizon in this one, partly because we were fairly careful not to disturb them. So I took away most of the stuff that I could identify as last year's leaves and the year before's leaves, and what's left is beginning to decompose. We've got a very thin O horizon here. See this fluffy, organic stuff? Lovely stuff. Yeah, go ahead and feel. See how fluffy this little bit is? And you see a little bit of mineral stuff in there. Then, so I would put a mark here. We're doing the stick thing. I need some more sticks. Anybody got some sticks? So as I go down here, where would I start? Yes. So you see that there's sometimes wide transitions or very abrupt transitions between the layers. And if you were to get deep into soil profile description, you would describe that transition zone. Is it even across your pit? Is it very broad? So we see some differences here. These leaves weren't, at least in the, I should have pulled these out. But this root was in there. So this shouldn't be here. Stop. Something going on there. See, I would actually put this here, but we'll take it out after. We tend to, you can divide it up, and then you'll take away some divisions, because maybe this is too thin to be significant. And we're working in a, right, in a auger boring rather than a pit. So you lose a lot of information as you pull it out of the ground, the structure, the relation of those features to the stuff around it. So I'll go down here. Stop. And then as you feel this soil profile, you might say, oh, I need to add in a difference because I don't see it, but I can feel it. Or maybe we don't see some rocks because there is some gravel down here. So as I move down here,
stop. Stop. Stop.
And then the end.
So these are all the different levels?
These are all different levels. The other thing I didn't mention when we were giving them names before, you can combine those master horizons. If it's got properties of a B horizon, but properties of maybe a C horizon, I could call it a BC. If it was more C-like, but I see some soil formation evidence here, I call it a CB. So there's a whole lot of that in the descriptions that we have of this entire county, this entire western shore part of the coastal plain. So the next thing I would do is start to take these away maybe, or texture. So what we're going to go into is texture. So the soil texture, the definition for texture is the particle size distribution. That's a weird term, isn't it? Particle size distribution. So it might be a gravelly, sandy loam. that's over about 15% coarse fragments in a layer or in a sample. So sand is anything from 2 millimeters to 0.05 millimeters. So how would sand feel to you? More coarse, scratchy. What did you say?
Crusty.
Crusty. Crust we tend to talk about at the surface. It's another term that we do use in a different context. Yeah, a coarse texture would just barely hold together and a coarse, it is sand, and loamy sand. For Envirothon purposes, you use the broad USDA textural classes, not the, or the broad textural classes, not the USDA textural classes. So I will throw around terms like silt loam, loamy sand. Those are the USDA textural classes. The ones you guys use, coarse, moderately coarse, medium, moderately fine, and fine. So you have 5 textural classes. Do we have in the boxes, do we have the plastic coated? Smaller than 0.002 millimeters is clay. Clay is what we call colloidal in size. The particles are so fine that it's easy for them to be suspended in water and carried in water. This is why clay movement in soils is important in our classification and our description of our horizons, and it's a feature we look for. So clay is very small particles. Other things that you might be familiar with that are colloidal in size are things like milk proteins and red blood cells. So this is the size particle we're talking about. Things that cannot be seen even under a regular microscope. You need something like a scanning electron microscope to see clay particles. About the smallest thing that we can discern with the eyeball is a fine silt particle. It's finer than that, we cannot see it. So that's why we rely on our hands for texture. As soil scientists, we calibrate ourselves. We learn how much clay and sand, how they feel and how they behave as we texture them. So the process of texturing, we have 2 of these flowcharts and things floating around. Keep them circulating as we go through this. That flowchart, it's the process that I go through every time I pick up a piece of soil to texture it. So the first thing you want to do is to wet it up a little bit. I don't know if anybody bakes, but it's like cooking your bread dough up till it's not sticky, but it's not dry. This technique takes a little bit of practice. Just a little professional tip here. Most people who do this a lot teach their non-writing hand to do the texturing. That way you can take notes and you're not too messy. Because taking notes is a very important part of any science. So you wet it up and you see if it forms a stable ball. So that might be, you can make a little ball from it, poke at it, does it hold together? Or you see me tossing it, that's, if I can toss it and it stays intact, it's definitely not coarse. If it's coarse, it would fall apart. It wouldn't hold together no matter how much water you put in there. It's not going to hold a stable ball. I go like this and it will, whether it's fine sand or coarse sand. So the next thing to do, and this is the tricky part, that takes a little bit of practice, you want to see if it forms a ribbon. Not a snake, not this. That's not a ribbon. You want to see how it's holding together as you push it out across your thumb and forefinger. So I'm pulling it together by bending my forefinger, and I'm pushing with my thumb, coarse fragments. Coarse fragments break up your ribbon and make it really hard to see how long your ribbon's going to be. Then I look at what's the nature of my ribbon. This ribbon is about 2 knuckles. Where it says inches there, I go by knuckles. 2 knuckles, roughly 20% clay. Another little thing, if you go like this, you rub it, and it's shiny here and it's shiny there, then it's going to be fine texture. So now I know it's not fine, and I know it's not coarse. So now I got to get it into medium, moderately fine, or moderately coarse. So there you look at the nature of the ribbon. Is the ribbon smooth? Now this one's not. You'll get to feel that, but you can kind of even see the sand here. Mm-hmm. That brings me to something I always say: you do not see texture, you feel texture. So I can't look at that and say, that's coarse. No, I have to feel it. You can't look at it and say, it's clay. You have to feel it. You can a little bit say that's got a higher clay content because maybe it's sticking together. It's got some structure that I can see. And that's one of the things that we use to break this horizon out. It's sticking together. This one's sticking together, and then these are kind of crumbling. Those are the sorts of differences that you can use to sort out your horizons. So my ribbon is 2 knuckles, 1.5 inches or so. It's not smooth, so it's not moderately fine. It's not extremely gritty, but it's pretty darn gritty. We're somewhere on the borderline between moderately coarse and medium in this case. So, I don't remember which layer I got this from, so I'm not going to put it back in the profile. So what you guys can do is feel it and work it up and try and determine the texture. So we've already noticed that this has no.
Yes.
Nice little thin O. Then what's this one? What color? What's pigmenting this? Organic material. Our rich, dark brown, coffee, chocolate colors from organic material. Remember what I was saying? The colors we see in a soil are often the colors of the materials, the fine materials like clay and finely divided organic matter. Those colloidal-sized particles are actually acting as paint. So the larger particles, the sand and the silt, are covered in paint. That paint is your clays or your organic matter or some combination of both. So in an A horizon, our paint organic. So this is a nice A horizon. Let's move down here. Just for briefly. We notice, why do we pick that out? It's darker. Do we think it's a buried A? Well, probably not. We don't have the advantage of looking at this in a nice pit and seeing what this little layer is actually doing. My guess is that it's an old root that got died and is now decomposed. So our organic matter is coming from that decomposing root right there in that little spot. I don't think it's colluvial burying of an A horizon. It's not quite thick enough. And then this material that you see here that's a little bit darker came from the fact that I was augering through and mixing this stuff up because the auger kind of twists it and breaks it up. So, why else do we care about soil color? Let's see. Let's go back. We've got our minerals. It tells us about the mineral, about the horizon. So when our color comes from clay that is iron oxides. What color is iron oxide? What is iron? Rust. Red.
This color.
Iron can actually come in all sorts of colors and in different chemical phases in the soil or in our world. So rust, that rust color, when it's finally divided, iron oxides, clay-sized particles, as that paint on the soil, we see the reds and the browns. So in a B horizon, where clay has accumulated, we often see our strongest, richest reds and browns. So looking above the B horizon and below the B horizon, I might see where's my strongest, brownest, richest color in this soil profile. It's all of this. Right?
Yes.
You see that? It's kind of subtle. This is not a bright rust red, but it's a stronger color. Trick with both texture and color, if you're trying to determine if something has changed, gradual changes are hard to pick out with your eyeball. So what you do is you take material from the middle of a layer in question. So maybe I'm wondering, are these two different colors? Far apart, it's a gradual change. Together, you see that they're somewhat different. It's a subtle difference. So you take material from the middle of the layer in question to compare it. You do the same thing down here. I've got this and this. It's a gradual change. We might see this one a little better. See how the one in this hand is a little bit redder than the one in this hand. So that's how you can help yourself see gradual changes. The color book magically appears. Sometimes those subtle changes aren't different enough to show up on our color tips. Our eyes can see more differences than this color book is going to show us in numbers. We'll get into the color book a little bit more. So, if I were to give all of these layers, lump them together, what would you think I would call them? B. So our colors coming from the iron oxides as paints. How about this? E. Actually, that's an interesting guess. I would call it a BC. I see structure. I feel that there's not that much less clay than these layers. These were moderately coarse, and these were on the line between moderately coarse and medium. So I would call those B, C. In the contest, I would accept C, and I would accept D as names. So the color is not always telling us that it's a B horizon. You can have gray colors throughout and still be a B horizon. Okay, any questions on this one? So what horizons did we have? O, A, B, B, C. Yep. So in the contest, you'll have the letters, and you will be circling which ones you've got. So in this case, I would accept O, although the O is extremely thin. A, definitely. I would be looking for A and B primarily. If you gave me C, I would not argue. Okay, what have we got here?
A hydric soil.
A hydric soil, yes. What does hydric mean?
Submersion in water.
Wet. It's a wetland soil. It formed in wet conditions. So what does forming in wet conditions do for us? What's the difference between these two? Color, organic matter. Guess what? Well, let's go and I'm going to break this up a little bit so we can see inside. I intentionally kept it closed up so that it didn't change color overnight too much. So I'm just breaking open these clumps. It did change some. Smell, yeah, that's one that you can go by. Here we go. Yes, it does smell.
It smells like when I fell off the log with my head.
Okay, so I'll send some bits around. People can texture this. This is a little higher up in the profile. Anybody want to texture this?
It's your turn.
So let's take our sticks and do what we did before as other people are texturing this. Just for the So this breakdown is slower, and why would that be? It's anaerobic conditions. So these organisms need an electron acceptor in that system. So they have the ability to use other chemical compounds as that final electron acceptor. The next most easily oxidized thing is iron, or reduced thing, I'm sorry, I got it backwards. So iron occurs in soils. Remember we said that was the paint in a well aerated soil. Do you know much about the solubility of iron oxide? Is it soluble or insoluble? Very insoluble. But if the microorganisms use that iron as their electron acceptor, what are they doing? They are reducing that. Reduced iron is extremely soluble in water. So if the microorganisms are using iron, that iron's that paint that we saw on the well-drained soil, but they're using the iron, and they are reducing it, dissolving it. They're dissolving the paint. So that paint is going to move with the water in the soil and be redeposited in places where there's oxygen. So the soils, generally speaking, are not all wet or all dry. See the little rust red spots with gray around them? These are features that show you that process of reduction of iron and then it moving around in the soil, that shows me where saturation comes on average, year after year. So I use the soil color. See, it's pretty subtle. It's fine features, but I've got my rust red and my gray. So I'll show you the camera. Pretty subtle. So we're using color to tell us a lot of things. Organic matter, A horizon, O horizon, B horizon, iron oxides. Now we're using it to tell us where saturation occurs. This is the tool we use to communicate about color. It's called the Munsell Color Book. There are other color books, but they're using the same notation system. So rather than tell somebody I've got that avocado green, and you say, well, avocado I've got is brown, so what are you talking about? Avocado green. Instead, we use this terminology of hue, value, and chroma to describe our colors, and that way, when I say it's a 10YR74, somebody somebody else can say, oh, 10YR74 is this color. So I can communicate across the world that I'm looking at a 10YR74. That's roughly the color we have here. So to use the color book, we take the soil material and you put it behind the pages, or in some organizations it's like at the edge of the page. But you put it behind there and see where it matches up best. So actually it's 764. So when we're looking for signs of saturation, we're looking for what we call the 2 chroma. So the pages in the color book are called the hue, and that's written at the upper corner here. This is a 5YR. So my book is arranged from red to yellowish. See? But each page has also rows and columns. The rows are called the value. The value goes from light to dark. The pages go from red to yellow. So a low value like this is darker, and a high value is lighter, like your light grays. Then chroma. I mentioned a 2 chroma. We're focusing on how much of that color is in there. So on this page, this is 5Y, and I go across here. 2 chroma is these first 2 columns. I can go from a black to a white, or very light color, and from a in sort of neutral gray out towards a more yellow or greenish gray. Then we have these special pages in here are just for our very wet soils. They're called the glade pages, and they're all 1s and 2s. So this color is probably going to be found over here on our glade pages, something like this, but maybe back here. So there's a lot of flipping around in this book, especially if you're not real familiar with the layout of it. So here we have something like a 5Y31. Then if you don't like the numbers and you want to have words, you go over here. I look up 5Y31. It's called a very dark gray over on this other page. The dot for each and each have a name. All of these colors are called paleo. Okay? So you look over here, that's these colors. You'll notice there is no word orange in this book. Orange is yellowish red or reddish yellow. Strange, I know, but that's the terminology. But this is a tool used to communicate. It's also a tool where we throw around that term, 2 chroma. So when we're looking for how to determine our depth to saturated zone, and next our drainage class, we look for those gray colors. This one, we know the drainage class is very poorly drained because we have our thick, dark A horizon and an O horizon. But here, we want to find out where's our saturation come to. You have to look pretty carefully. In this case, I'm going to start up here. I'm going to look for the gray within the brighter colors. But as I break this open, I see no gray. This is a fairly washed out color, for lack of a better word. 2.5 Y. I'll show you about what color we've got here. But we do not have a 2 chroma in this case. We're actually a little redder than that. I was on a 10YR. Somewhere in here. So that chroma is about 3. So this area has more of a 3 chroma. So I come down here. Is this my zone of saturation? Well, as I break these things open, I see a good solid gray. If anybody's wearing a gray sweatshirt, that's the kind of colors we're looking for. Ooh, look at that. I usually get it a little bit moist. Because I live in a moist climate, I do my soil colors on moist soil. So, is this a 2 chroma? Let's see. And I think my answer is going to be yes. There's actually some. And I have about 35 to 36 inches to the gray colors. So that's where the seasonal high water table comes on average in this soil. Well, what's that mean to us? Would you want to put your foundation into a soil that has a water table 3 feet from the surface? No. Not to say you couldn't, and most of us probably do have this. But you want to know that this is going to be a problem and design around it. There's ways to engineer or design around a lot of issues with soils, but it helps to know that they exist. So now you're armed with some information that can help you evaluate. Say you have a piece of land and you want to know, is this a good place to put my house? Or do I need to put a sump pump in and put some tile drain around and get that water away from my foundation? You have this knowledge now. And you can also use the soil survey to give you, a first guess is where's the better place on the map to put it. And then you go out there and you say, oh, something's weird here. It's not the best place maybe. You can look at your soils now and say, I don't think this is a great place. If it looks like this is not where you want to put your house. So, drainage classes. Drainage classes were an agricultural interpretation. Interpretation is how that soil is going to behave for the use I want to put it to. Soil surveys were first done for agricultural evaluation of the land. They were looking at salinity in some areas and suitability of soils to grow tobacco in other areas, like Connecticut. We started doing soil survey a little over 100 years ago, about 120 years ago. So we developed drainage classes, and they were for agricultural crops. So, roughly speaking, agricultural crops don't go much deeper than 4 feet with their roots. So below 4 feet doesn't matter. So a well-drained soil is a soil that does not have a water table within 4 feet of the surface, originally. Now we look a little deeper. We look at 6 feet. A well-drained soil with a wet substratum might have a water table 4 to 6 feet from the surface. So we have no gray colors within 4 feet of the surface, well-drained. The next one, moderately well-drained, no gray colors 20 to 40 inches from the surface. And then next one, wetter, is called somewhat poorly drained. Gray features 10 to 20 inches from the surface. This soil profile doesn't quite show us, but you can have either a gray matrix, like we have down there, or here, or you can have a brightly colored matrix with gray features, little gray features in it. We call those reduximorphic features, and we used to call them models. So people will throw around the term models. That's just color variegation. Reduximorphic features show you where the water table comes to. So it might be little gray features within a red matrix or bright matrix, or it might be gray matrix with the little red features like I showed you. So somewhat poorly drained, those features 10 to 20 inches from the surface. Poorly drained, the gray features are 0 to 10 inches from the surface. And then very poorly drained, you have an accumulation of organic matter or a thick A horizon. And we have both in this case. saturation at or above the surface, and then gray colors below that. There's one more drainage class which takes texture into account, and that's called excessively drained. So you have coarse textures and no seasonal high water table or no redox features within 4 feet. Okay, so there's only one drainage class that takes texture into account. Excessively drained is sandy and well drained. Okay, so let's go back inside and we're going to look at hydrologic